Hello everybody and welcome back to a ship review episode, and today we're going to take a look at the tier 9 free XP cruiser, the Azuma, which is basically the B65 project. This is the new Japanese tier 9, we'll call it a super cruiser if you want to think about it that way. So the question, of course, is this ship actually worth getting, or should you actually wait for something else? And if you want the too long didn't watch version of this, I would say I would pass on the tier 9, and I would say wait for the supposedly future proposed tier 10 version of this ship, which I think will be quite a bit better. So let me explain what is wrong with the Azuma and why she really just doesn't stand out. And the first big thing is the armor layout. Take a look at the ship and you'll notice that she's got a 25mm upper deck, 25mm bow, 25mm center deck, 25mm upper belt. She's got 25mm stern, 25mm everywhere pretty much. And at tier 9, this is not a good thing because pretty much any battleship looks at you the wrong way. Even those 380mm battleships look at you the wrong way, and they can get in very, very good damaging salvos. One of the more scary ships, for example, Jean Bar, because that thing with the reload booster can really, really put a lot of hurt into you. So she's got basically toilet paper, wet toilet paper, as armor. She does have, essentially, if you take a look here, she does have the inner belt armor, which is, got another 25mm piece on the outside. So that is a bit of spaced armor, and you could theoretically treat it like it's, like black hole. People shoot in that area, the shells will disappear if you angle correctly. But, when you've got the rest of your ship that just eats penetration, people don't even have to really shoot you here. They'll just shoot you everywhere else, and you will take huge amounts of damage. So, her HP pool, it's big at 58,350, but considering the amount of damage you will take from just random battleship penetrations, it's not really enough. So you might say, okay, if you've got such issues protection-wise, maybe she makes up for in other areas. And in a lot of other ships, you would say, okay, maybe you'd have maneuverability or concealment to make up for it. And by the way, I'll come back to the guns in a second, but if you take a look at this ship, well, your turning circle radius is 920 meters, fully spec'd with the rudder shift module. Again, not both rudder shifts, just one rudder shift module, rudder shift 11.1 seconds. So your rudder is not particularly fast, your turning circle is pretty damn large, and well, your concealment, even with concealment expert and concealment module, 11.9 by sea, 8.7 by air. So this is a ship that can't really turn, can't really hide, and can't resist any shells. And the minute you have that kind of combination, the ship is relegated essentially to one role: long distance support. And you might ask, hey, is she going to be good in that particular aspect? And the answer is, well, maybe sorta. So that, we have to look at the guns. So 310mm main guns, these guns have good velocity, their arcs are pretty good. I mean, it's not hard to hit stuff, right? Range, 19.1 kilometers, so that's okay. But take a look at the, sort of reload time and the turret traverse time, and you'll notice an issue. Her guns don't exactly traverse super quickly, which again, for a ship that needs to be dodging and actively turning a lot, it's not really fun to have slow turret traverse. Reload time, not exactly fast. Her HE shells on paper look good, 5100 damage, 27% chance to set fire, but in actual gameplay, with the reload speed, you're not really getting a lot of fires. And the HE damage when you hit, well, let's just say that, yeah, on occasion you get a good salvo or two, but it's nowhere near the amount of damage that you can get with just other fast-firing cruisers. So, not super impressed even with the guns, which are supposed to be her strong point. She does have AP shells, they are usable, they do have decent penetration, so yes, on occasion you will be able to Citadel battleships if you hit them in the right places. One other thing, her dispersion, well, her dispersion is, you'll see, in game her dispersion is kind of just meh. Like, You would think that they would give her really, really good guns to make up for all these other weaknesses, but no, they don't really. And that's why I said it's probably better just to wait for the tier 10 version of the ship, because that version of the ship is at least supposed to have like 30 millimeter, I think, center deck armor, which will allow that ship to at least tank some of the 380 millimeter shells and even some of the 406 millimeter shells that are going to be thrown her way. But Azuma, the tier 9 version, absolutely not. This ship is just wet toilet paper and will get smacked around. And especially if people focus you. If they focus you, yikes. One last thing to talk about, her anti-aircraft guns. If the enemy CV flies into your flak clouds, the Azuma's AA is actually not terrible, as she does put up a reasonable number of explosions for reasonable damage, and you do have those flak salvos go from 1.9 to 5.8 kilometers. So, the CVs, when they fly their planes in, they'll be exposed for those, to those flak clouds for quite a while. However, that's assuming that they don't know how to dodge the flak clouds. If they know how to dodge the flak clouds, well, the AA is kind of pointless as well. Anyway, in terms of recommended modules and captain skills, this is pretty much what I'm going to say. Go for get main armaments mod 1, get damage control, get aiming systems mod 1. Again, every bit of accuracy is going to help the ship. Get steering gears, get concealment, and of course get the main battery modification 3 just to increase that DPM. As for the captain skills, I would say you go with the very, very sort of standard build. Although you can make some slight corrections. I would say priority target, expert marksman, adrenaline rush, superintendent, concealment expert, fire prevention, basics of survivability, and that's pretty much going to be your 19-pointer. In terms of utility, in terms of consumables, she doesn't really get all that much. She's got the very standard DFAA, she's got a scout plane. She does have more repair party charges than normal, but again, the number of times that you will get randomly citadel in the ship, you'll take lots of damage, it's just too much. And the heal charges, it'll keep you around, but your ship overall, like I said, is super, super fragile. But enough talk from the port, let's take a look at how she performs in battle. So here we go, Hotspot and Azuma, and the strategy for Azuma pretty much in every game that you're going to play is pretty simple. You are long distance support cruiser slinging HE. Like, that is it. That's pretty much your job description. Do you use your AP? Yeah, I did mention you use your AP every once in a while when you got like full broadsides, and you have to be a little bit closer in range. Max range, you don't really get all that much, so a little bit closer in range. Armor piercing, yeah, you can get yourself some citadel hits as well, but her armor piercing isn't exactly any kind of special AP or anything like that, so really most of the time you're going to be shooting HE. Like, that is going to be pretty much your bread and butter in this particular ship, and like I said, it's not a very complicated playstyle. If you see enemy ships, you're going to be kiting. A lot of kiting. That's a lot of trying to run away from big battleships. Now, against cruisers, you are capable of doing some good damage to them. You are capable of getting good citadels on them. But if they angle towards you and you're going into an HE sling contest, okay. I mean, you will take a lot of HE damage as well. Against destroyers, you don't really have a lot of utility to go after them. Alaska has radar. Like, you don't exactly have any kind of that anti-DD utility. She's just a ship that doesn't really, in my sort of experience playing her, honestly have what I feel like is much of a presence. She's very, very passive. You can't really be very aggressive with her. Just overall a ship that, even though I can get good damage games and have decent games and have decent overall damage, it just, I don't like her. Like, it just feels like it's a struggle all the way through. Like, yay, I'm going to land decent HE salvos, and you will see it, but the damage doesn't exactly, it's not like Zhao levels of damage even, where with Zhao you can land a good salvo and be like, whoa, look at that, I did a huge chunk of HE damage. This, you don't even get that. Okay, and also pay attention to the dispersion. For a ship like this, you really needed good, reliable guns, which means you really wanted good, reliable dispersion, and you'll notice that the dispersion isn't all that reliable. Like, take a look at the orange shells and you'll notice that, yeah, they're not exactly super tightly grouped together. And that, I think, kind of exacerbates the problem with this ship, right? It's like finally when you do get good salvos, they're not always as consistent as you want. I mean, they're not inconsistent, but they're just not as tightly grouped as you would want them to be. It's like, you know, if I was going to deal with this, why don't I just play a Zhao? Kind of becomes the question that you're going to have when you play the ship, which is a question that I constantly have, which is like, why don't I just play a Zhao? That ship is stealthier, more agile. Its HE is just as effective, and it's far more agile of a ship. There's just so many better things about that particular ship. Yes, I know it's a tier 10, but seriously, right now, tier 9, tier 10, functionally in this game, there's like no difference at all, as you pretty much end up in a lot of tier 10 games anyways. Yeah, just for me, Azuma is... as you can tell, this Iowa wasn't very bright, just kind of full-blown rushed in here, no regard for anything. So yeah, able to farm off some damage on the Iowa. A lot of times with Azuma, that's another thing, is you're almost completely dependent, if that's even the right way to put it, on enemy battleships being bad. Like, in this particular battle, this Iowa just rushed in there. Okay, so like that worked, right? The Iowa wasn't paying attention to me. That worked. And you'll notice later that's going to repeat, right? Like the enemy battleships were not good. And so that allowed me to actually survive and to actually do stuff. But in a lot of other battles where if you run into like even a couple, like 2 competent battleship players, Azuma's going to have a very, very rough time. Because if those battleships know that they can just shoot at you anywhere, and as you can tell, you're a pretty big ship, not a small ship, and you're not very agile either. If they just hit you with those shells and they just overmatch your 25mm and they just go in and get penetrations, you can be looking at very easily, you know, 5-digit penetration numbers. And if they get lucky, they hit like a citadel, like yay, you know, 1 shell, there's 14k, you know, depending on which ship hits you, HP gone. Azuma's just way too fragile, and because of that, you constantly play her, like I said, in this sort of support role. Like you'll notice that my battleships in my division are ahead. If it was non-division, it'd be the same thing. Battleships are ahead of me, and I'm sort of hiding in the back. And that's it. That's pretty much her playstyle. And because of this, she also has very, very low map presence in a way. Like she isn't one of those ships that really, you say, goes out there and has a huge impact by herself. She just depends on other ships to do stuff. Like, see enemy battleships, and you're like, okay, I hope my battleships are out in the front getting the attention. Run to an enemy destroyer. Oh, I hope I have a radar ship that's going to help me light it up, or I hope I have a destroyer who's going to go spot it. That's how it's going to feel, you know, that's the Azuma life. And, I mean, there is one other thing as well, and it has also to do with the fact that I'm going to have, and this is my, I guess, intrinsic bias as well, and I'll have to put this out there, is Azuma is a ship that doesn't do well when she gets focused. Unfortunately for me, I have a certain degree of name recognition, which means that I can go into battles where other ships on my team are spotted and they're closer to the enemy battleships, and yet I'm still getting shot at. And so in those kinds of situations, Azuma does even worse. Because remember, like, she has no ability to resist shells, and she's also not really agile enough to be actively dodging them as well. So if you've got like a couple of ships, if your priority target shows, let's say, like 3 or 4 ships targeting you, get ready. Some pain is going to be coming. So again, like I said earlier, there is a certain degree of Azuma's play where you're really dependent on enemy battleships not knowing what the hell they're doing, which is going to be the case in this particular battle. You notice that on the other side there is a Nagato, and you'll see the minute I saw the Nagato, I turned away. That's because Nagato, with its guns, will very easily do large amounts of damage to me. Fortunately for me, you'll see what the Nagato ends up firing most of the time, which does allow me to farm off some damage. Enemy Fiji has also appeared. I'm going to try to get my guns onto that target, lead correctly. Now, of course, shell velocity, as you can tell, is quite good. The shells do get downrange in a real hurry. Of course, the Fiji is going to get blapped by something else, so unfortunately, I don't really get any damage off it. Okay, so return my attention back to this Nagato. Now, initially, when I saw the Nagato, I immediately turned away, but Nagato didn't really shoot at me, and when he does finally shoot at me, it's a HE salvo. So I'm able to turn back in here, go back on the attack. Of course, the Nagato does sort of angle away from me, so I am loading an HE salvo just to continue to shoot at him with that, hopefully set some fires and farm a little bit more damage. Azuma's playstyle is not the most exciting, I'll be honest. She's not really capable of doing things that the Alaska's capable of, not really capable of doing what Kronstadt's capable of. So, sort of the competitors to the ship for in the super cruiser category, Azuma honestly is not a very good ship, and I would say that if you had like a million free experience to spare, I would pass on this. I would not opt to get this particular ship. Potentially, there'll be another ship in the future that's also going to require that million free experience. Probably save it up for that. Now, if you've got time to farm up, I believe it's going to be coal for the tier 10 version. I'd say wait for the tier 10 version. It's just going to be a better ship from, at least the initial specifications that they've talked about, the ability to have 30mm middle deck armor. Like, that's going to make a big difference, right? Azuma, every time that Nagato shot at me, like, I was just like, oh, I hope it's not going to be an AP salvo, because if it's an AP salvo, yikes. And there's a lot of me that was just hoping and praying that every time that Nagato fired, it was going to be an HE salvo. And because he's firing HE, I know that I'd be able to be more safe, right? If it was an AP salvo that was coming towards me, I'd be a lot more wary. You'd probably see me go a lot further away as well. A lot of times you're playing Azuma, you are going to be more of a standoffish support cruiser. Which then, when you really think about it, I mean, there's a lot of other cruisers in the game that already sort of fit that role. Unfortunately, the Azuma just, I feel like she just has this sort of weird convergence of bad traits, and she doesn't have any sort of offset to it. And a lot of times that's kind of what you need when you have glaring weaknesses, right? Like certain ships, you go, yeah, they maybe don't have the world's best armor, okay, but then they have concealment to make up for it, or they have maneuverability to make up for it. And Azuma really doesn't have that. She's sort of got all the negative self-defense protection aspects of the ship. And that makes her just very frustrating to play, because it's a ship that there's not really a way for you yourself to mitigate damage. It's like it's not some sort of angling, or none of those things really work. And really what it's more up to is the enemy battleship player just that crap at playing their ship? Is the enemy battleship player incompetent? Do they not know which ammo to use? Do they not know where to shoot, where to lead? It becomes more of that particular kind of issue. And anytime you have that, the first part of the ship is already super frustrating to play. And then, of course, you have the issue where, yeah, she's got guns that are pretty good overall, but then there's that level of, I guess, inconsistency that doesn't really reward you either. Like, I had a salvo there against an Alaska that's basically going slowly backwards, and I'm gonna land like 3 hits, right? I'm gonna give slightly better salvos the next time, but there's still just that slight level of inconsistency with the guns, which makes it feel like, you're making so much sacrifices for protection already that the guns don't fully make it up to you for it. I mean, there's 5 hits. I got 1 fire. That was, 6,000 damage. Not even. It's like 5,800 something. But the reload's also a lot slower, So it's like, I think I can do better with other ships. In a situation here, I would much rather, if I'm going to play a ship like this, I'd much rather play like the Ibuki or something, a ship that's got good dispersion, it's got good stealth, it's got, torpedoes that can do things as well. It's just like, I'd rather play a ship like that than play this particular ship. Anyhow, this battle's going to go on for just a little bit longer. I mean, you can see again, 4 hits, 3,800 damage. I'm not exactly rolling in that HE damage either, and there's a strange belief that people have put out there that, like, oh yes, her HE is really potent and, she's basically a Zhao. No, Zhao is far more consistent with her HE damage output, and this one just isn't, it's not coming close to that. Zhao also sets a lot more fires as well. Let's make that clear. So, all in all, yeah, my impression after having played Azuma, and I really, like, I'm not talking like 1 or 2 games, played it for a good number of games, is I would avoid her. I mean, there are going to be the few players out there who are maybe really going to like her, and that's always going to be a personal preference. I mean, there are people who like Roma, for God's sakes, you know? And there's always going to be those people. But for the overall population of players out there, I think Azuma is just nothing but frustration. She is not a good ship at all. And if you have a million free XP, I would say there's so many other better things to do with that million free XP than to spend it on this particular ship. Interestingly enough, you know, her work in progress version was almost a better ship to play. Yeah, she was still fragile as all hell, but at least her guns were really consistent because she, you know, I think back in the day when they first had the ship, she had cruiser dispersion, right? Now they've given her that sort of intermediate dispersion formula that's in between the battleship and the cruisers. And it's just made her guns not consistent enough in her current state. Maybe like if she had gotten better Sigma, like aka Stalingrad style, you know, she would make sense. But just in her current state, it's a hard pass for me. This is a ship that is 100% a hard pass. In this particular battle, yes, my damage numbers are good, but this game was more the one-off than the norm, right? Because hey, I mean, I ran into Nagato that fired 3 salvos of HE at me, right? If had that been 3 salvos of AP, I'm not going to be looking like I'm in my current state and condition right now, you know? And if I was a lot lower, then these airstrikes that are coming in right now from the CV are going to hurt a hell of a lot more. And perhaps that enemy cruiser might be shooting at me and finishing me off instead of allowing me to chase them and to sort of fight things on my own terms. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty much my take on the Azuma. I mean, I'm going to let this battle play out because it's just going to be a few more attack runs by this enemy CV. And by the way, like I said, you know, with the CV, it's, again, if the enemy carrier knows how to dodge your flak clouds, your AA is not doing all that much. If the enemy CV isn't great at that, then you possibly will have a lot better luck downing airplanes. I mean, I still shoot down, I think, a reasonable amount of airplanes in this particular battle, but a lot of it comes here at the end here, where I think the enemy carrier is also in a more of a panicked situation as well, trying to potentially kill me off so I don't kill him. So, yeah. Yeah, like you can tell that in a lot of cases I'm not really stopping aircraft from coming in to strike. They are getting their strikes off. In normal battles I've tried with or without DFAA, I've tried sector reinforcement. It doesn't really matter. It's the Azuma, right? It's, you know, you're dependent on enemy CVs also being kind of a derp, you know, just flying all their planes into your flak clouds. That's pretty much what you're hoping for. You're hoping for incompetent battleships, incompetent carriers, if you're going to really get those good games. If you have enemy carriers that know what they're doing, if you have enemy battleships that know what they're doing, then you could be having games where you're just not doing all that much, right? Battleships that focus you at the beginning. Because again, you're this big ship that's not super stealthy, and if battleships get a beat on you, they can hit you really hard even at the beginnings of the game, you know. And since you're also not very maneuverable, there's some really interesting awkwardness that happens if you get spawned in like at the wrong point on some maps, like South Hotspot. You know, there's these islands that sometimes you spawn in. Your ship being so not maneuverable with this big turning circle radius, sometimes you can't actually turn, you know, behind the island. You have to go in front of it, which exposes you to very, very much unnecessary early game fire. And that's happened on occasion here and there. Anyhow, so enemy carrier has gone down. I mean, I farmed off quite a bit of damage from that carrier, farmed off some plane kills from that carrier. And I believe I'm also going to be able to kill off that cruiser. And once that's done, the battle's pretty much over. So once I kill off that cruiser, we'll take a look at the end results screen, and you'll see sort of the damage distribution and sort of how things go. Azuma, it's usually a nice balance between sort of AP and HE damage, although you're still going to be heavier on the HE side. As her AP, because it's not got any sort of special auto bounce angles or anything like that, the situations where you use it is still somewhat limited. Okay, so there we go, final salvo here, finishing off that Mogami, and that does it for this battle. So final results screen, 189,664 damage. Like, this is more of a exception than the rule. You know, good credits, good experience, good number of hits, good citadels, good fires, right? This was a nice battle. Top of the team in base experience, Not usually the case, by the way, with Azumas. Damage distribution, you'll see it's pretty balanced between fires and HE and AP. In this particular battle, I did get more AP damage, so that's good. And that's pretty much all I gotta say about the Azuma, folks. Hard pass on this ship. Save your free experience for something else. Wait for the tier 10 version to come out, and hopefully that one will be better. Anyways, take care of yourselves, folks, and I'll talk to all of you again next time.